Welcome to This Week in Pulling, the show that brings you all the action from the world of tractor and truck pulling. I'm Dan Mayer, joined by Jeremy and Miles Krieger, and each week we'll dive into the latest highlights, breaking news, and behind-the-scenes stories from the sport we all love. From upcoming events, standout performances, and the rich history that shaped pulling into what it is today, we've got you covered. So buckle up, This Week in Pulling starts now. Well, welcome back to the second episode here of This Week in Pulling. I'm Dan Mayer, joined by Jeremy Krieger, Miles Krieger. Guys, how you doing tonight?
Evening, Dan. How are you, sir? Good to see you again.
Very well. Doing great. Miles?
Yeah, doing great. Excited to see you guys and get number 2 underway here. And thanks for the feedback we received on number 1.
Absolutely.
Always great to get that first one underneath your belt and move on to the next one here. And we've got some great things coming up here on this episode here. We're going to talk, of course, about the what's going on, the latest things in pulling. We'll also have a topic of the week. We'll also have a couple other things. We're going to also have the big list, the reveal here for the driver rankings coming up here on This Week in Pulling, which is going to be pretty interesting. I'm ready for the comments because there's been quite a few people that have had heard about what was coming, and they're kind of interested how this is all going to work. But all these pullers are going to be voted on by their peers. And everybody has been represented, all organizations. If you're a class that pulls that particular class, you're going to be represented, and it's going to be pretty interesting. So we'll have that towards the end of our show here today. But we're going to kick things off here today with, what's the latest news here in the sport of pulling. And we've got the Mid-America Truck Show is going on this weekend in Louisville. And we got a couple pullers represented here this weekend, don't we?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I saw, that's Adam Kester never sleeps, I don't think.
Right.
And obviously I've seen a lot of work, obviously for him in the shop to get a lot of that work done, but a new wrap and a new reveal kind of for his tractor. I think he moved that tractor in on Sunday possibly, and obviously getting ready for several full days on display in Louisville in the wing there.
Yeah, and then also we've got Jeff Hurt's going to have his tractor on display as well at the Hot Shot Secrets booth there this weekend at the Mid-America Truck Show. Obviously, no pull this year, but we'll hopefully it'll come back next year. It was kind of gaining a little bit of momentum, and then like you say, some issues arose with the sponsor and stuff like that, and it's just one of those things that happens.
Absolutely, but it like I say, it kind of stood on its own. I think it did well for for March and Freedom Hall going the opposite direction. Always fun and mini rods in there. Always something to look forward to. So fingers crossed they can bring it back one of these days. As I do think, especially with the Mid-America Trucking Show as part of that, there's a great need for it, and I hope it comes back.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, we'll see. You never know. Like you say, we're working on some other things, so hopefully everything will get worked out, and we'll see it back here once again. Now, on the NTPA side, we've got some sponsor news this week. Dr. Preload has come back on board to sponsor the Super Semi class here for the third year in a row. And I know we've had the opportunity, throughout certain events to, we've had some folks representing with Dr. Preload, always good folks to talk to, and, glad that they're coming on board to sponsor the Super Semi class here again.
Yeah, we've had a couple of really great interviews at Louisville the past year, discussing that when we were there for the Mid-America Trucking Show. So they were there kind of as sponsors and able to be involved in the event last year, which really kind of caters to their customer and a chance to have them right there and then the semis be running. Obviously, they've become a tremendous fan favorite of a class and one where if we can get all of them together and have, as many as they have, it's awesome. It's a heck of a show, and there's 15 or 20 of them in a line to come run with you.
And it's been quite a few years since we've seen, nowadays it's, if you can get, 7, 8 of them, you're looking pretty good. But like you say, hopefully the things will start turning. You know how it goes. Every year you kind of, classes come, they go, and come around there. So, yeah, that's hopefully we'll see them come back stronger here this year. Also, with the NTPA side of things, we've got purses being raised on the regional side this week. That's always good to hear. A class getting a little bit more money, but the regional classes looking to add a little bit to their pot here for 2025. So that's good for all those regional pullers.
Absolutely, and giving back to the pullers, it gives them a little more reason to do good and chase those ending season points. That's exciting for everybody.
And then we'll move on over PPL side. This week announced that MAF TV will be coming back as well with their TV package, as well as CBS Sports. They're going to have a bunch of half-hour shows with CBS Sports, and then the hour shows with MAF TV. So that's always good to see, pulling on the networks, and then also LiquidTube joining as an associate sponsor with the PPL circuit as well. So some good things happening on both fronts there this week. And we've also got the big news that the Full Pull Live is joined with Outlaw TV to bring you more expanded coverage here for 2025. And that's going to be pretty exciting for the fans, out in the Midwest that really don't see a lot of the outlaw pulling. That'll be pretty neat to bring that all under one umbrella.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely agree. And something that you and I talked about, a few weeks ago and months ago is the idea of what you started to introduce, as well as Full Pull, your kind of vintage classes that you're bringing out there and showing online. I've been able to enjoy a couple of those already.
Yeah, and it kind of I'm at that point now with the Photo Joe collection here. We're working into some of the older outlaw stuff, and I'm kind of making my way through that and going through and scanning a lot of the pictures there from the early days of the Outlaws, and it's pretty neat to see where they have, where they started and where they're at now. And a lot of the pullers, that started with them are still, actually pulling with them, and pretty neat to see how they've all, evolved over the years. So that's pretty neat.
Very loyal. You think about each organization that we've talked about this evening, incredibly loyal following with their competitor base. If you're running Outlaws, you are a loyal Outlaw follower. If you run Grand National, you're a diehard NTPAer, and if you run on the Champions Tour, you're a diehard pro pulling person, and that's just kind of everybody's got their path they choose.
And then we talked last time about the farm show where it kind of brings everybody together, and the rules have kind of fallen into that where you can actually do that nowadays. Where years past it was so hard to bring everybody together, but they've really strived at working on that and bringing everybody together to put on the show that they do.
Well, I know Dave Bennett always referred to it as being on the other side of the river, and I sort of always kind of enjoyed that analogy because in February in Louisville, it doesn't really matter what side of the river you're on because you're with the best of the best. But getting out there with the Outlaws and seeing what they do, and then of course the folks from Texas and all out west. We don't get to see them as often, but in Louisville, there's always an opportunity for them to be there if they do good with the Outlaws in their season. So it's always exciting. And, of course, Texas was very well represented this past February there, and looking forward to seeing what they do this summer for sure.
And speaking of down south, this weekend, actually the official start to the outdoor pulling season, as we'll be down in Hammond, Louisiana for a Midsouth pull. And talking to some of the folks in charge of that deal down there, looking for big things down there. I'm actually looking myself forward to the Cajun food down there, but
absolutely, sure.
never had the opportunity to hit the Cajun hot and heavy like that. But looking for a big pull down there. They're looking for about 50 to 60 hooks down there to start off the Mid-South circuit, and some great crowds they've had over there the last couple of years, and they just keep building that. And make sure you do check out Full Pull Live here this weekend. Going to bring you action both Friday and Saturday night, as we will also have a countdown show, which will be 2 hours before each show. So I think Friday night is going to be 7 o'clock start time, and then 6 o'clock on Saturday. So we'll move, 2 hours previous to that with the countdown shows. And, that'll be pretty exciting. I've never announced a pull down Louisiana before, and there isn't a whole bunch of them. I heard there's an antique pull down there, but it's going to be pretty neat. And I guess, the event just keeps building every year, so that's kind of neat.
And what can you say about the Mid-South bunch that hasn't already been said? They're doing great things, and like I say, having them expand into Louisiana and get a little further south. I know they've got some Tennessee, some Alabama, and Louisiana as well. I don't think they go to Louisiana often, but I think this will be a great start to their season, and I just hope they have good weather down there.
Yeah, me too. I heard it's supposed to be, in the 70s, possibly 80s, and there's a slight chance of some weather one of the days. But you know how that goes. It's early in the week here. We'll see how everything all goes. But 5 big classes down there. They're going to run 2-wheelers, the noise class. They've got limited pros. They've got super farms. They've got the light limited super stocks, which have been the hot topic here as of late. and some mini
Yes.
rods down there as well. So it should be a good, looking forward to it. It's going to be exciting show down there. So actually the pro stock diesel trucks will be down there as well. So yeah, so five class. I think I added one that I shouldn't have, but
Absolutely. So two great pulls this weekend, covered by none other than Dan Mayer, our fearless leader here tonight on the program. We're looking forward to seeing you in action down there, and I'm assuming full pull picks will be in full regalia there as well, with the opportunity to get out there and do some things on the full pull bets, full pull picks app.
do a little bit of wagering and see who you like down there, and you can watch it in, and during the afternoon you can check out some of the outlaw action that'll be on there as well. They're starting to integrate that all into the full pull live platform there, so that'll be it'll be excellent here once pulling season starts, because you get home from an event and you'll say, hey, let's check out this event here and see how that all went, and instead of just looking at results, you can actually go and see how everything actually played out for that particular event. So really looking forward to this one here this weekend.
And I can't believe we're getting started already. Like, we're not even to April. We're still in the month of March, and the season is breathing down our necks. So good way to kind of ring it in and get things started down there in the Delta this weekend for you. So congratulations. I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes when you get back.
Yep, so once again, 7 o'clock on Friday night, and then we'll go again 6 o'clock on Saturday. Well, guys, let's roll into our topic of the week here that we've been talking about here on This Week in Pulling. We're kind of, during the off season here, we'll kind of bring a topic of the week that we kind of vote on, and what we think would be the most interesting for our folks out there listening. And being all three of us are announcers, how about we go into that that topic there of why did we get started, and who did we look up to as all these years of going to polls. And I'm obviously talking to two guys right here that grew up in the same house with one of the best in the business, but I mean, we'll kind of throw that back and forth, just different guys that we've listened to over the years, and I thought it'd be kind of interesting to get everybody's what they think of different guys throughout the year. So Miles, we'll get it started with you tonight. We'll get rolling on this. Some of our favorite announcers over the years that we've listened to here in the sport, and kind of we've kind of followed different things that different guys have done, and
Sure.
get us rolling.
Well, I guess I'll tell you, I have three or four that really kind of, I would say, molded or sculpted me to where I feel like I am today. And then I have a couple that, I get to interact with today that might be what I would categorize as current announcers or still actively playing in this game that have truly, truly impacted me while I got to work with them. Something they've done, I learned, something they've taught me over the years. So I don't want to steal anybody's thunder by any means at all in terms of the ones I share.
Nope.
Not at all.
But let me say this as well. Dad isn't one I'll mention in terms of the group, because I think it's already kind of built in naturally that Jeremy and I immediately kind of gravitated to some of his style, some of the things that he liked to do. Those are things there that immediately stick to me, and some of his patented phrases like "right there" and "one tough cookie" and those sorts of things are still adamantly part of the history of my mind, I guess you would say. But I guess the three or four that really, really stick out in my mind are Army Armstrong, who certainly not just from a truck and tractor pulling perspective, but also from a Monster Jam perspective or a monster truck perspective with TNT. I remember being about 6 years old, and he came to Galena Elementary School, where I went to school, and had lunch with me, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So Army was one who I absolutely loved. There's a gentleman by the name, of course, of Harold Walliser, and Harold is who I used to refer to all the time as Grandpa. The very first roller coaster I ever got on, he sat right next to me and held my belly at Cedar Point as we rode that weekend. In the summer of 15 and the summer of 16, I got to leave, or I guess when I was 15 and 16 years old, I left home. Mom and Dad took me to meet him and Betty, and I rode through the state of Ohio with them and did the Columbus state fair sweep up to Bowling Green and sold T-shirts with him in the trailer, which was awesome and a lot of fun for me. And so, Harold became somebody who was a big part of who I was. Getting to work with Dave Bennett and the Outlaws and truly learn a little bit from him on the art of working a crowd and sort of getting to share stories with them. While I've never brought up stories of my mother-in-law or things like that he might do to get a laugh, I definitely enjoyed my summers with him for a couple of summers. And then another guy who I think, for years and years and years may have been one that I think was phenomenal, but probably underrated because nobody really got to hear him unless they were traveling throughout the state of Illinois, and that is Mr. Art Downs. So getting to work with Art and learn a lot from Art and listen to him very closely. Those folks I think are, if you think about Dad, Harold, Army, Dave Bennett, Art Downs, those would all be kind of guys, from the very beginning of my announcing, from the very beginning of my childhood that I got to work with and learn with and really put some notes into. Obviously, you two sitting here, and I'll stop for a second, and then we'll probably keep talking, I'm sure.
Well, you talk about, like with Dave Bennett, there's a, and there is, like you said, there is nobody better to work a crowd than Dave Bennett, and that's one of the things that, we have talked about over the years, just the art of, how he had that, does have that magic. And, when I saw him down in Lufkin this past, October, and he picked that mic up and he just went right to work, and, he was just there to just more or less see everybody, but he just picked up that mic and, he was just ready to go back at it. And we had kind of talked about, some things throughout the summer there and, with Dave, and, that just, that's one of the things you bring up about, Dave Bennett. And that's one thing that I always, bring up when his name's brought up, is just when there's downtime, there's only one guy that really knew how to, pick it up and take the ball and ran with it, and that was Dave.
For sure.
You guys keep going, because if you don't, I'll keep going, and I've got a list of others that I'll talk to you about. So
you're sure. Dan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple myself. When I first, my first few pulls that I ever saw, Dave Grimm was the announcer, and more or less the excitement that he brought to the sport was unparalleled at that point. When you're, for the first time you're watching a tractor pull, and then you hear this guy and just the way he presented it, it was just, it was pretty amazing. And there's a shot there of Dave right there working the crowd at the Indy Super Pull. He was one of those guys that, it didn't matter if it was monster trucks, didn't matter if it was, it was pulling, he would bring you, and he'd just bring the excitement into it. And just the way he played with, Go the Gorilla back then, and they played back and forth. And he was one of the guys that really, when you look at Miles had talked about, trying to find your style and what you want to do. And there's a guy right there that, I always felt that, the excitement that he brought to it was something pretty cool. And of course, I can't, not talk about Mr. Butch. Butch was a guy that, I heard him on TV before I actually heard him live. And, it was one of those where it was like, okay, you've heard the voice, now let's hear it. When I went to the farm show for the first time, it was either the farm show or Bowling Green, the first time we went to either one of those, that I heard your dad the first time. And it was just the way things rolled off of him. I mean, it was just, it's like magic, and then working with Harold there at Bowling Green, and then eventually the farm show, it just, that was just, and then they actually, worked quite a few events, like Bristol, Tennessee, and different events where they were just brought in together and just like magic, and Miles and I talk about that all the time, the peanut butter and jelly right there, and that's what they were, and that was another one that, really looked at different styles. And then of course, we talked about Dave Bennett there, and had the chance to work with Dave at the farm show there, and that was another one that, really just the different, styles, and you just kind of, take what you get from all these guys, and just all great, and that's.
I say this about Dave, and I think you can corroborate that story now that you worked with him outside of the farm show. But Dave Bennett at the farm show is not Dave Bennett that you see at an outlaw event. And when you get a chance to work with him at an outlaw event, and I'm not knocking him from the farm show, I'm just saying when he is in his element, I don't know if there's many that are better than him. He was just as cool as a cucumber, and just amazing with the stories that he could tell, the technology that he brought, and the history. And that man jumped in his truck and took a trailer with him, and they went everywhere that those outlaws go. And, so I think I do quite a few events in the summer, and think about the fact he was doing 60 and 70 kind of at his peak. That's kind of crazy. A comment about Dave Grimm. I don't know if God wanted him to be an announcer, but I can tell you that the voice that gentleman had may be one of the most just natural, most recognizable voices in the sport. You think about just snap your fingers, close your eyes, and ooh, that's Dave Grimm.
Yep.
And speaking of which, just going back to the NTPA banquet here in December.
Yes, sir.
Dave was there to induct, Les Houck. Now, Les, I didn't have the opportunity to hear Les. I heard him at the Indy Super Bowl the first time went down there, but that was about the only time I heard Les on the mic. So he was more or less at the end of his announcing career there. I think he was at Syracuse one of the years we went, but there's not a whole lot there. But, Dave was there to induct, Les Houck, and as soon as he picked up that microphone, it was like it was 1986 again or whatever, It was,
Yeah.
It was just amazing that, and then just quick as a whip as far as, remembering this, remembering that. And just like he, hadn't been away from it at all, and that was pretty amazing.
Sure. My turn.
Jeremy, what you got?
Well, we'll talk pulling for sure, but I think, in the broader scope of announcing, I don't think I get into the pulling piece without a few early influences that made me think, okay, if I ever get behind a microphone, this person is going to, I'm going to remember the things that this person did. So, I'm going back across motorsports, and I'm looking at people like Bob Jenkins. I'm looking at people like Larry Newber. I'm looking at people like Ken Squire, Mike Joy, the people who can tell a story and stay calm and sort of just get into you with their vocalic. Doesn't matter what's happening on the racetrack. They have you riveted. And I remember, watching Thursday Night Thunder religiously with Miles at the house on a summer night. And it didn't matter that, like people like Mark Dinsmore and whoever else, Rich Vogler was at the IRP track, but those guys were telling the story, and that's what I was paying attention to first. And I think from a very, very young age, I caught the fact that these guys were telling a story and making the story better simply by doing what they were doing. So I would be remiss about talking about pulling in general without sort of laying the foundation as a youngster with people like that. But I would say in pulling, and we're going to have a lot of overlap here for certain, but Miles and I had talked at length about, we wanted to fly on our own. Like Dad was our dad, and we didn't want to be just Dad's kids. Like we wanted to be able to say that, hey, we did it ourselves, and we cherry picked from him on the things that we liked. But, so yeah, I will stay kind of in that vein and talk about others first, with the implication that my dad influenced me like no other. But I would say away from my father, Harold Walliser is got to be one of the best from the era that he was in. I wish that somebody had it on tape, but I remember being at Bowling Green or somewhere at an OSTPA pull, and Harold took 5 minutes and basically explained the water injection piece of a pass, like what's happening as this smoke turns from this color to this color to this color, and he would talk about the diesel engine and being fully decompressed, and this is what they're doing, and I just remember being like, oh, wow.
And the way he did it in layman's terms, you were like, oh, okay, makes sense.
And I was like, wow. I've been at the shows forever, and I didn't know how to even explain that, and you just did it lickety split. And I remember from that point on just listening, and Harold, and you and I have kind of talked and kind of tongue in cheek about how he and Dad would sort of layer things on, but Harold would just know a town in Ohio like the back of his hand because he was a truck driver and he drove oil trucks and did all the school buses and all the things he did there. So he wouldn't be anything for him to tell you where Lynchburg, Ohio was, or Lucasville, Ohio, or any of those places, and what was close to them. And I always enjoyed him being able to put the whole Buckeye State together and kind of give you a visual of where that was. And you do that. Like, that's something you pick up on. Like, I'll listen to you and you'll tell me, he's from, Western New York, 40 miles from Buffalo. And I always like that. That's something that I kind of take away from listening to you. But others in the sport, I think, of course, if you talk about Harold and you talk about Dad, early on, Army Armstrong was a big one for me. Just the way he could weave something, the way he could get you excited, like gunfight, shootout, Donnybrook, some of the things that he would say. I always enjoyed Scott Douglas in the beginning, when he was with on the pulling side before he went to Monster Jam. I thought he was very good, enjoyed him quite a bit. And then Keith Bradley at Bowling Green. I know by trade he was an auctioneer, but there's another voice. You talk about Dave Grimm, you talk about just closing your eyes and hearing that man's voice. I know who that is. There's without question, there's no other voice that sounds like that guy's voice. And, I can remember being, a mile away, deep in the pits or in the campground at Bowling Green, and the minute that happens, you hear that guy's voice and you're like, okay, here we go. Hey, Harold, it's time. It's time to get something cool is going to happen soon. Get to the pulling track because things are happening. Keith Bradley's on the mic and it's time to go play. And then I think others that I have learned a lot from currently, the Illinois Bulldog, as Miles said, working with Art Downs, that man has a knowledge of case tractors in particular. Previous to the IH, that man can tell you horsepower ratios. He can tell you how many they made. He can tell you what year they were made. He can tell you anything you want to know about a particular tractor. So working a class of tractors with him really gives you another layer because he's just a walking encyclopedia of tractors. And I enjoyed quite a bit working with him. And I think others, currently, I enjoy working a lot with Alan Washburn. I got to be with him one year at Chapel Hill, Tennessee. Learned a lot from him and just the way he goes about, the introductions to the shows and the things he does with, keeping the crowd involved. So I would say, some of those guys are definitely my influences for sure.
I've got we can keep piggybacking on some of these guys too, because as you get a little bit deeper, there are several, but, a name that I continually see when we talk about announcing and the reach and the amazing things they did is Tom Hartzell.
Sure.
Tom, I did not get to hear him as much in my younger years because the truth is most of the events I was going to in my younger years were with Dad. Well, right. Tom was a lot of times at different events, but sure. I have heard him a few times on recording, and again, another undeniable voice with amazing technology in terms of what he could explain and how. I know he's still actively involved in a circuit with some dirt racing. I don't know that he's doing very many pulls anymore, but Charles Posh is a guy who has talked to me about Tom Hartzell and has shared some videos of Tom Hartzell that I've gotten to listen to and watch. Another gentleman who, in my very introductory years of getting to be on the mic in Toma, Wisconsin, I got to learn and meet a lot about Mr. Kenny Mack. And talking with Kenny Mack was really, really awesome. Getting to sit and just listen to him tell stories. And that guy's memory was unbelievable as he would explain and discuss kind of the introductory years of the NTPA and how things really formed and came about up there. That's a gentleman who every year when I am at Toma, I get to stand in the tower that bears his name. And I don't take that very lightly, rest his soul, So, and another gentleman who's sitting in that tower, of course, is Mr. Washburn and Doc Riley. So Doc is a guy who has just really spanned the gamut of motorsports announcing and involvement. And he's another guy who, if you give me enough time, I promise you, he will tell you a story. He can talk to you about the younger years of his announcing career, take you to Nebraska or take you wherever he can, and share a story with you. So, I guess as I continue to try to build my years of announcing, it's pretty awesome to look at the longevity of those people that we love and adore in announcing. I mean, you think about Dad doing it for 40 years. Well, that's not really a number that trumps a whole lot of other folks. Kenny Mack had years like that. Harold had years like that. Army had years like that. I mean, there's a lot of folks with really long-standing careers with a microphone in their hand, and I I love that.
Sure.
Yeah, and going back to talking about Doc, and have the opportunity to work with Doc at Bowling Green here the last 6 or 7 years, and just talking some of the stories over the years, and he's kind of the guy that once you get him rolling, he gets rolling. But you got to kind of more or less get him up to speed there, and he'll take right off with it. And I just love listening to some of the stories over the years, and traveling to different events, and it was kind of that transition where Doc kind of took over from some of the older guys that had been around for so many years on the NTPA circuit. Dave Grimm had kind of moved on from that point, and Ed Johnson had retired, and so it was kind of interesting how that all with Doc, the new face of pulling back in the the late 80s, early 90s there, and he took the ball and ran with it. And Tom Hartzell, a little bit after Doc there, when Doc went to work in motorsports, he had that program he used to do. I think it was syndicated, but he had a motorsports show that he went and worked on there for a few years and got away from pulling. And there where Tom Hartzell kind of came in and filled that void at Fort Recovery, Inwood, Ontario, different pulls that I would go to, and you'd hear him there, and another great voice. And it just somebody you forget about, and because he's been sprint car racing here for the last so many years. But yeah, another great voice that you go back and listen to him on the old tapes and stuff, and yeah, it's really cool to hear him.
Sure. Well, and I think now that we're talking about it, like there's other ones that are popping into my head. I had the opportunity several years ago with the Sullivans, to work one show with the late great Archie Kaufman, the Kentucky legend, as it were, as they called him. And he did a whole lot, when the TNT era was big. He was with pro shows, doing kind of the sister, tour away from what TNT was doing at the time. But he had several catchphrases that he, continued to use up until his late 70s, early 80s. And, I think one of the most memorable ones I like to listen to him was talking about that tractor's smoking like a schoolhouse stove. I mean, just some of the things that he would say, get back, and, Chevy tough, he's Chevy tough. And, people would just eat it up like it was the greatest thing in the world. And, I mean, the first night I saw it, I was looking at him like, wow, this is awesome. And he talked a lot about Dad, and gave me some stories about Butch Krieger, and so it was fun, and enjoyed him quite a bit. But I only went to one show with him, but it was enough to remember for sure.
Well, back then too, the heyday, as we call it, of indoor pulling back then. You had pro shows going on. Your dad was with TNT with Army, and Dave Grimm kind of piggybacked along with that. But then you had US Hot Rod, where Mike Galloway. I only had the opportunity to hear him once at Rich Stadium there in Buffalo. He did an event there, and that was the only. We didn't get to see too much US Hot Rod where we were at, but
Right.
you'd hear him on TV quite a bit, and he was quite the character, and still is.
Sure.
And there's another guy that I really would like to hear more live, but just never had the opportunity to hear him.
I never wanted to cheer for a rainout, but I'm telling you, when I had them at Toma, getting to sit with Kenny and Doc and just let them tell me stories made the rainout kind of worth it.
Sure.
As you think about, today, I often joke about the fact that there's so much pie in this sport that we can all have a chance to eat pie and enjoy our own events. And so, if we don't mention that person or somebody, it doesn't mean that they're not a phenomenal announcer or somebody that we look up to. We've gotten to learn a lot more about announcers through this class that we've participated in, to get to know some new folks and some folks that have been around for a long time. But I will tell you, another thing that I have really learned a lot about in terms of announcing is a little bit more about preparation. And I think Leslie Mears and I think Greg Whitaker, who are folks that you and I get to work with at a couple events, Dan, they've taught me a lot about that in terms of just being prepped. An opening of a show, and this is a discussion we had in sort of our NTPA class of announcers, an opening of a show can actually be the most stressful and most difficult moment for an announcer. And folks like Leslie and folks like Whitaker make that look quite easy, which has made me try to pay attention to what are they doing and how can I make this introduction make this seem so seamless. And it takes time to have a flyover at Bowling Green and have it calculated to the second that the Star Spangled Banner is going to hit its highest note, the crescendo of that with Abby singing as the airplanes fly overhead. That is not a fluke scenario that occurs. That is something that takes time and effort and prep, and I've learned a lot about that from Whitaker, and I've learned a lot about that from Leslie, getting to work with him and listen to him, and because of that, I think there's a lot of folks that are phenomenal at what they do. I would love nothing more than to be able to go to some events and just sit and listen, so that I can learn more as well, because I certainly don't have all the answers to how. I just have the way that I do it, and for me, it works.
Yeah, and one thing, with Greg, and even with Leslie too, it's the teaching part. It's just the little, and like you say, every time you work with them, you learn something else new that, and Greg's the kind of guy where he'll say, hey, why we do it this way? Well, we do it this way because, this is how, and it makes sense. It's just different things over the years, working with him, and it's the same kind of thing where, he'll tell you why, and why it works and why you do it, and it's just, you always put it in your memory bank, and always listening to something that he always comes, being a teacher as long as he was in in motorsports here with the Monster Jam and all that, and
Yep.
got to really learn some different things with him, and then of course with Leslie too. She'll say, hey, but this is kind of the way we do it here, and this is why, and and just, yeah, all great things that help you down the road.
I'm not sure that this is a fair statement to make. I just think that when you think about really good announcers, a lot of times there's always a really awesome counterpart with them as well. So Harold and Dad were very complementary. Harold's strengths helped Dad's weaknesses, and Dad's weaknesses or strengths helped Harold's weaknesses, maybe, to make them a perfect group. When Dad would go to Chapel Hill and get to work with Chris Gilbert, Chris's excitement and energy for the event and Dad's knowledge of the national circuit made for a really neat coupling. At the Outlaw sort of things, Dave Bennett was phenomenal, but he also had Fred Petch, and Fred was right there with him and had a lot of technology and a lot of energy and a lot of excitement as well that he could inflect into that show. And so when Mr. Bennett was looking for his next person that he was going to pick on who was sleeping in the stands, Fred could bring you up to speed even further with what was going on as well. And so, I don't want to ever say that I think you have to have a good partner, but for us, those of us that get to work some larger shows, I can tell you, having a really good partner or a partner at all that is up to speed, that can fill that gap for you, makes a big difference. And I think there's a lot of times that's how the scenarios work. When you think about really good announcers, there's usually always a counterpart sitting right there on the wing.
100%, more or less. They know what you're going to say, and you know what they're going to say. The next thing, basically, is how it seems to work out. But yeah, absolutely, that's got to have some of these big events. You can't do it by yourself. That's for sure. And out there for 4 or 5 hours, and got to have, and like you say, worked with some great people over the years. And what do you think, Jeremy? What about? Have you worked with anybody that really stands out?
Well, you guys. Working with you guys has always been fun, and in terms of I stop and you guys start, or vice versa. We can play off of one another, and because we're comfortable with one another. But I think maybe away from you guys, I've gotten the opportunity the last couple of years to work with Matt Hart up at Henry, Illinois, at the Marshall Putnam Fair. He does a great job. He's an auctioneer by trade, but he's really good at sort of, to your point, Miles, keeping, while I'm, looking for trophy presentations or looking for the next person to interview, or talking trackside about what's happening, he's keeping the crowd full on what's happening at, with the distances and who's in the lead on 2 tracks at the same time. So he's been really, really good at kind of coming up to speed. Just as an Illinois State regional announcer, he's done very well at the Marshall Putnam Fair with I've enjoyed working with him for sure. And of course,
we're going to get to work with Charles some this summer too. So that's a gentleman who I've heard a lot about and have gotten to listen to only in recordings, really. But that's a guy who we're going to get to work with some this summer. So, exciting aspect there to introduce him, I guess back to the full Grand National events that he hasn't been able to do. and get a chance to work with him as well. So, I mean, you think about the list of folks, and I mean, there are people, I'm sure, Dan, from out east that that do a fantastic job that Jeremy or I have never heard, that and compliment well, and then there are folks around here that do a phenomenal job as well and get to announce events and do things together as well. So.
I can tell you, going back to my early days of announcing, a guy that really took me under his wing was Rick Fight out in Full Pull Productions. Rick was one of the guys that, met him at, I forget where it was, one of the, he would bring in, I think he had a smoker series back then, I think is what his big, group was with him that came around with Full Pull. But he was the guy that, took me under his wing and kind of, showed me the ropes and, hey, you want to go this direction, you kind of want to do this, and, this is kind of how you, so he was kind of like a, more or less a hands-on mentor when I'd meet up with him there, and, was always, never looked down on you, and, always, was always to help, right there to help you. And that's one thing that, I try to, if, working with somebody new that's, try to be that guy that, help them out and give them any tips you can, and, try to help them along as best you can, because there's nothing worse than working with somebody that you really don't work well with, and it's just very awkward, and you just, you don't gel very well, and it's like, that makes for a long evening. You guys know about that.
For sure.
You can look at it one of two ways when you get in these scenarios. You can either have a partner and somebody that's going to help you, and you can work with them, or you can be threatened by them. And if you're threatened by them or don't want to interact with them much, you're not going to have quite the experience you desire. So, get out there and do, and learn something. And when helicopters come out to dry the track, hope and pray to goodness that person's got a chance to tell a story with you while you're standing in the track in Ontario.
Yes.
And I've always kind of thought, I've kind of envisioned, an airplane flight. Like you always have a pilot and a co-pilot, and that's, having a tandem to kind of bounce off of one another. And basically, you go in, you have a job to do. Maybe I've seen you this summer, maybe I haven't, but our job is to get the show on the road and keep the fans informed and give them a good show for what they've paid for their tickets and their admission. And that's what we do. We green means go, and we get it done. And then after it's over with, we breathe a sigh of relief and go on to the next one.
Sure.
Now I got to ask you guys, your dad working with Jack Crowner there at the farm show, did you guys actually hear him anywhere else, or was he like a radio guy, or was he?
He did the farm reports for the local radio stations. So he would be the one that he would talk about farm reports, but he would also do the prices. So he'd come up medium frame, US 1s and 2s, and he would talk about cattle prices and hog prices and all these things every morning on 840 WHAS and all of the syndicated stations around Louisville. And then I think he also did some farm work and some other MC kind of stuff on Wave Television, Wave 3, and that's where we knew him. But I don't know that he announced other tractor pulls other than his agricultural background is what got him into the National Farm Machinery Show. I think Lloyd Douglas was there at that time as well.
Yeah, because Lloyd was one of the first, if I remember right.
Yes.
He one of the first that...
Yes, sir.
Now, did you guys also had an opportunity to hear Ed Johnson at all, or?
I did not. I think you had a video of him not long ago that had his, because I remember asking you, who is that? And you told me who that was, but I had not heard him, coming up.
I was thinking we went to the Super Bowl one year, Jeremy.
I think we did, but I don't think that I knew that's who that was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we went to the Indy Super Bowl one year with Dad, and I remember hearing him. Now, to be able to quote him or speak of him very well, not so much, but we probably should have heard him.
Yeah, we probably did, but we heard a lot, and we were youngsters back in those days, and I don't think we had the presence of mind to understand who we were. Like, who is this person? And I mean, I remember Dave Grimm being there, but I don't remember, both of them being there.
I was back in the pit area throwing Matt and Mark and throwing the ball with them and doing things like that. I was
playing Nintendo with with the Midnight Express bunch and the honkin' donkeys of the world in those days.
There you go. Yeah. With Ed Johnson, because I want to say the first year that I went to Bowling Green was like his last year there. And the one thing that I can remember about Ed Johnson, he wasn't very tall, but that voice that he had was just something. I mean, it was just one of those, deep voices that really, you could, grab onto. And just echoed through, him working with Harold there, and then, Keith Bradley, and then, then your dad came on, I believe it was the next year. He more or less took over for Ed Johnson there at Bowling Green. But yeah, that was a voice that really didn't get to hear, it kind of, he was going big in the 70s there, early 80s, and then by the time, got to go to some of the bigger events, he was more or less winding down. But yeah, no, that was another guy that, you look back and you go, wow, just the voice that he had,
Yeah, I think we collectively need to make a decision that we're going to revisit a topic of influence like this again sometime, where we talk a little bit more about announcers and the impacts of what they've done, because I think we could fill 3 or 4 or 5 of our segments or episodes with this topic. There's no question, as we all can be very passionate about the people that we get to listen to.
For sure.
Yeah, it's just always, kind of go back and you think of, different guys that you heard, and, it's, you forget about this one or that one, or, that's the interesting part too, is, that, like you mentioned, Tom Hartzell, heard him a bunch of times up there at Inwood, Ontario, and just, one of the guys that, you just never really, once he left the sport, and, you really didn't think too much of him. But yeah, it's always good to come back and, remember all the, some of the great things. Everybody had those great sayings, and they were all known for it, and that's pretty neat.
For sure.
I remember Dad working with Dwayne at a couple events. They called him the Black Sheep, didn't they? And then John Bannett up there at Arcola, there was another guy that Dad used to be able to jump in and listen to every now and again. So there were some folks that did a lot of announcing that Dad got to collaborate with. But he did a lot of events too. I don't do nearly as many shows as he did.
I want to say he was with Fort Wayne, didn't your dad work with him up at Fort Wayne? I
Yes.
I remember.
Yeah, I was going to say, or
there.
Terre Haute, or maybe both of them. Like I feel like.
Yeah, I remember hearing him at Fort Wayne. We went up a couple of years, and yeah, that was tried to avoid the alcohol poisoning.
That's fair.
That's one thing I remember about that full being up on that upper deck there. Where you could walk around, and oh man, it hung in there like the smoke hung in there crazy. Yeah, so great topic, guys. Looking back on some of the greats there of the sport here, and this week we all got a message from Mr. Dennis Payne this week, and he had kind of more or less gave us we were talking about doing something like this, but it was more or less like a heavenly call of fame, more or less is what he called it. And we were kind of looking at a way to honor some of the greats, when they've passed, and different pullers, and we'd like to touch on that, one a week or so, and kind of go back and look at some of our memories of that particular puller, and and Dennis had kind of give a couple different ideas how to do it, and this week we're going to do Mr. Richard Lustic, that we unfortunately lost just a few weeks ago. And Rich was a guy that had seen for quite a few years. In the early days, the early smoker days, we'd see him with his Super Steeler tractor. Being from Western New York, he seemed to come up quite a bit in that part of the neck of the woods, I guess you would say. And Richard always, great looking equipment. And one thing that I'll never forget, like I've got a picture of it here, is one of the years came up to Langford, New York, and you would see him from time to time at Syracuse and some of the bigger pulls, but this was one of the local pulls that he came up to. And that particular weekend, the Super Steeler didn't have the best of runs, but yeah, it was just kind of neat, seeing that Grand National caliber tractor make its way to a state event. And and then of course Richard over the years just did some great things with the alcohol tractors there, and of course a great dad and granddad. And unfortunately, like we say, we lost him there not too long ago. But thought it'd be kind of fun to go back and reminisce about us watching the Super Steeler, and of course the Silver Bullet over the years.
Absolutely. Well, he's it's a D21. What are you going to say? Like there's a D21 on the track, and if there's a D21 out there, then I'm going to be watching it. And the Super Steeler was always a beautiful piece. To your point, he brought whatever he brought to the track was a top notch operation is absolutely beautiful from top to bottom. Of course, being in 84 PA, just outside of Pittsburgh, big fan of the Steelers, and so that's where the name for that tractor came from. Just larger than life kind of guy, super, super nice, always, had a smile and a handshake for me, and just very, very kind, and, doting dad to Jordan, and just you always kind of got the impression that he was really, really, really proud of his kid, as they collected accolades with those tractors and various variations of the Silver Bullets over the years. You always just saw him kind of relishing in Jordan's success. But I think, deep down he was a puller first and was able to pass that on to Jordan. But just look at that picture. Just a beautiful tractor. Always had this gorgeous equipment, and we talk about the families in the sport, and I think the Lustics are, ones that you really have to think about. Just a great family all around, and we will we continue to pray for the family. We will miss Richard for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing I want to say is because we experienced loss of our father in a sudden moment and had no idea kind of that it was coming or what to do in that moment, we can definitely sympathize and understand as we lost both of our parents that way. Certainly, I guess if I were to talk about it, I think ingenuity is something that I, have to think about, and the development of what those guys were doing in their shop. And when Jordan and his dad put their head together, they came up with some pretty awesome stuff there at Bullet Motorsports. There's no question about it. And then to go out on the track and back it up and bring out just some very, very amazing pieces. You think about dominance and what those tractors were doing right at the time that Jordan was really hitting the track. They found a combination that was phenomenal, and so right off the bat, he just went. And Jordan and I are a very similar age, and we had a chance to got to grow up together in this game. Obviously, when I think about Richard, I think about what Jeremy said: an awesome handshake, very firm, a smile that could not be replicated, and obviously a willingness to welcome me or someone else in with a nice hug and a chance to explain something. So if I had a question, if I wanted to know more, there wasn't a concern whatsoever about sharing that information with me. I remember sitting at Henry, Illinois. A lot of times the Lustics and Jerry Reed and his family were very, very close. And so they were often in Illinois early, and we went up one evening early for the show and stayed there on a Friday night and got a chance to just sit back and relax and visit with those guys before all the rigs came in even. Jordan was already parked, and we just had a chance to listen and talk to Rich. And, those are the memories I think will stay there. Some Bowling Green, obviously Bowling Green memories there, and going and talking after the pulls and visiting as well. But, there's no way for us, and I wish collectively the three of us could make this project happen even more. And as we do, I hope that we do that to be able to bring these stories and share kind of the impact, but also what it was these folks were able to do. It's unmeasurable, obviously, in what they've been able to do, and then in their success that they've had. And as we work through more and more and more champions that we've unfortunately lost recently or in the last few years, it's sad that our list grows the way that it does.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one thing that, and it's interesting that all three of us have the same, more or less the same memory with the handshake. That was the biggest thing with Rich, was that handshake, no matter good, bad, or indecent. It was always, whenever you come up and they'd had a bad night, you'd get that handshake, and it would be, okay, he's Rich, and he's, no matter what happened, and and one of the memories I've got with the early days of the Silver Bullet was watching that thing run, and just how nervous you always were for Rich, because that thing always looked like it wanted to tip over. I know, every time the early days there of that tractor, man, it just, the wheel speed on that thing, and it started, rocking back and forth, and it's like, hang on to it, Rich, but yeah, that was a, like you said, a game changer in the sport. And the early days of getting them alcohol tractors up and going, and yeah, that was just and the record that that Rich had, in the short amount of time that he did drive that the Silver Bullet before he turned it over full time to Jordan there, and did a lot there in just them a couple years.
Well, and I think he was also, really good at the business aspect of the sport. When he had, when they had help from Simpico, you would go to those bigger events where there would be, hospitality at the trailer, and Rich would always be an integral part of that. And entertaining clients and entertaining customers and folks coming in on behalf of the sponsors, and that rig and that transporter just always just clean as a pin, inside out, upside down. They kind of understood that they were there to represent a sponsor, and they were going to make sure that their equipment was just top shelf from the beginning. And you go to a place like Bowling Green, and Miles and I shared many memories. But I remember, I don't know if I should even talk about this one, but I'm going to.
No.
What'd you say?
I said, "Oh gosh, no."
Don't talk about it? Okay.
You're fine. Go ahead, tell the story.
I just remember one night Miles and I were headed back to be done for the evening, and there was a gentleman who had way too much to drink this particular night, and he was passed out standing up on one of the vinyl straps holding their tarp, their basically their awning. This man is asleep standing up on their awning, and Miles and I just kind of were like, well, that guy's had quite a party today.
We asked him where he was going, and he said he was home. He thought he was staying there with Jordan that night, and not.
It wasn't your dad's buddy, Crazy Frank, was it?
No. But I'd never seen anybody, just pass out standing up like a cow.
The things you see, right? The things you see in Bowling Green. But yeah, no, I think great family, and like I said, condolences to the family here with the loss. But we just thought we'd touch on a little bit of some of our memories of watching Mr. Lustic go down the track, and of course as a leader of that team over the years and all the championships, and just the amount of work that went into, you hear stories of them, working on, driving to so and somebody's in the trailer working on the tractor while they're driving, and just the crazy back then when they were running ATPA, NTPA, and back and forth, and just making all them runs and doing a great job.
Well, we thank Dennis, by the way, as well for the affirmation that we needed. And I guess the thing I would say is we probably don't have the ability to create a lot of segments, as we're going to try to keep this to an hour. But if there are folks that are listening and tuning in that have an idea or a thought or a topic that might be something that will allow us to kind of bring this sport of pulling back into their face and give them a chance to watch and put eyeballs on it, or somebody who's no longer competing in this sport but would love to still be able to hear us talk about some of the past, we want to hear those ideas. So Absolutely. All three of us got messages from Dennis on our own personal Facebook accounts, I believe. They're there, and you can message us. And if you don't like us, you could probably message us that way too.
Yeah, either way, good or bad.
Yeah,
we'd like to hear
feedback. Feedback is feedback. But this show is for you guys and gals and everybody listening. So we want to make sure that we are bringing you the content that you want to see, especially now before the season starts. While we've got some downtime, and we can tell some stories that aren't going to be necessarily related to what happened last week in pulling. So for sure, jump on board and let us know what you'd like to see, and we'll be happy to try to accommodate you if we're able, for sure.
So guys, at this time we will bring up the graphic here. This is going to be the release schedule here for the full pull driver rankings, the first ever official rankings. Now these are voted on by a select group of competitors within each class, and next weekend show we will have April 2nd, we'll have the two-wheel drives, we'll have the four-wheel drives, followed by the pro stocks, modified, super stocks, mini rods, the super stock diesel four-wheel drives, and the unlimited mods will be our last class before we roll right into the Grand National Circuit there the following weekend. So this will be the schedule here. We're going to release the top 5 in each of these classes, and how it works is all the competitors were given a form, more or less, and you just went 1 through 5 who you thought the best puller in your particular class was. And the criteria includes not based on vehicles, engines, or equipments. It's strictly on the best skilled drivers in each of the classes. And like I said, they're going to be the top 5 ranked pullers. And it's going to be interesting because I think the comments are going to come hot and heavy once these are released. So this will be pretty interesting to see. And they must be an active competitor in that particular class. And we've got them from all organizations. If you say, for instance, modified class, we've got them from PPL, NTPA, and Outlaws. Everybody's included in that. So that next weekend will be the two-wheel drives, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion on that one. So that'll be really interesting next week.
I'm gonna challenge you guys both to go ahead and make your rankings too. We don't have to make them public, but nothing else, you'll have an idea of if we agree with the pullers.
Well, that's another thing too. Is this is all the information from the pullers. We're not going to tell you who the pullers were. We are just going to tell you that we got a breakdown of how many from each organization, and it's kind of been confidential. Which a lot of the pullers, that was the only way they were going to do it. They didn't want their name out there. So that's the way we're going to do it. More like a coaches poll. You don't really know who all the coaches were that make the calls there. So it'll be the same kind of deal here. So yeah, going to be this week in polling next week. Make sure you tune in for that April 2nd, as we're going to release that two-wheel drive list. And hey, you never know. It's going to be some pretty be interesting to see what everybody thinks of everybody else, isn't it?
For sure.
You bet.
So that will conclude this program here. Once again, we thank you folks for joining us here tonight, and we'll see you back here next week. We'll have all the rundown there from Louisiana, the Hammond Pull, everything that went on there behind the scenes, and everything else going on down there, and how much Cajun I'll be able to eat there next week. And excited about this pull. This is going to be pretty exciting. So we'll have that next week. Full rundown, everything that happened there. And well, guys. Number 2, we're done, and on to number 3.
Fantastic.
You bet.
And it's always a pleasure. Miles, it's always a pleasure to be with you guys, and thanks to the fine folks at Full Pull and everybody watching here tonight for tuning in.
We will see you guys all next week. Have a good week.